So yeah, thanks. Thanks for all of you for joining us. This is our second kind of symposium, and the idea really is just to keep in contact and get a sense of what you're up to, what you're doing, what's exciting, how you're kind of going with your research. So I'd like to welcome all of you. I'd like to welcome Janet and Nomalanga, fellow hosts. Very nice to see you both here. Nomalanga is saying that she doesn't have Wi-Fi, so she's in and out a bit, but there's also some comments on the chat about the NIHSS. And yeah, welcome to all of you who are here. Abby, Alex, Claudia is here, Busisiwe, Jenny and Marty. Good. So welcome to all of you, and let's hope that Mvuzo and Joseph will be able to join us as the time progresses. Okay, so I think really without further ado, I'd like to get us engaging with each other's work, and Alex has asked if he and Mvuzo can actually go first for this session, because he has a fairly important probably very important, more important than this anyway, a climate thing that he needs to attend. So I think let's hand over to you, Alex. If you'd like to kind of put your video on, if it's not on, and maybe chat to us in person, then yeah, and then we'll give you 10 minutes. Okay, Alex.
Thanks, Andrea. I appreciate it. And thanks everybody for giving me the allowance of going first, given the meeting happening at 10. Just in terms of Mvuzo, I haven't received a paper from him yet, so I wouldn't be able to respond to him, even if he came, at least not very well in depth. So I'm not sure what's going on his side, but either way, I'm happy to proceed without my partner, unfortunately. So maybe to kick off, and hi everybody, it's nice to see you all again. And so last time I presented a paper on the Shell oil and gas case and Montashe's role in accusing communities of colonialism of a special kind, and how that is quite ironic, given that, he is acting on behalf of interests like Royal Dutch Shell, which is, very much has been an agent connected to some pretty terrible colonial extractivism historically, and certainly currently still. And so I've kind of been working off that paper based on feedback that I got on this workshop for the last time we had it. And I submitted an abstract to a conference called Climate Coloniality, Mechanisms, Epistemologies, and Space of Resistance, which is hosted by the University of Hamburg in partnership with, I don't know if I'll say this right, Pontificia Universidad Javeriana in Bogota. And yeah, so it's building on that piece, the abstract that I put in there. And what I'm trying to explore is how polluting corporations and captured government officials that kind of work to serve their interests are appropriating and also perverting the language of climate justice, anti-imperialism, and decolonization in order to advance what is a pretty polluting, extractive, and arguably neo-colonial agenda in the global South. And this came out of feedback that I got in the workshop that I started, developing this. So I'm also grateful to folks. One of them was around, I think, was around what constitutes propaganda and what constitutes, what doesn't. And so there's elements of this paper that is exploring why this is a form of propaganda, because it undermines the ideals that it claims to be pushing forward. So, for example, Minister Montashe claiming he's anti-imperialist, when in fact he's working on behalf of, rapacious neo-colonial corporations like Shell, and those that use climate justice to try promote fossil fuels, when in fact, the climate justice arguably says we should be moving away from them. So yeah, that's kind of the paper that I'm working on. And I kind of started off with a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek thing, going to Gandhi's famous quote saying, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. And I said that a step in the progression that seems missing, though, is how your opponents will try to appropriate your language and pretend that a win for them is a win for the cause, right? And so when it comes to questions of climate justice, these appropriations are on the rise, with the fossil fuel industry trying to like appropriate language of climate justice, language of anti-imperialism, and try to paint themselves as fulfilling these goals. And kind of what I'm hoping to discuss is how these polluting corporations are moving increasingly to the global south, and that's partly due to them being regulated more out of the global north market. And this parallels how the tobacco industry also migrated much of its industry to the global south after anti-tobacco advocacy led to a lot of stigmatization and regulation of tobacco products in the global north. And in order to like justify the shift to the global south, these corporations are using the language of climate justice, anti-imperialism, decolonization, trying to paint themselves as if they are, you know, working to serve the interests of local communities in the global south. Often when those very communities are trying to resist that same extraction, right? And so that's why I say it's a form of what's called undermining demagoguery. And that's a term put forward by Jason Stanley, whose book I shared last time we chatted about how propaganda works. And there he defines undermining demagoguery as a contribution to public discourse that is presented as an embodiment of a worthy political, economic, or rational ideal, but is in the service of a goal that tends to undermine that very ideal. So basically, you claim to be, you know, fighting for a particular ideal like climate justice in your rhetoric, but in reality, you're undermining that very ideal. And so that's why it's propaganda, because you are, you know, falsely claiming that you represent that ideal. And so in my paper, I'm hoping to draw on 2 case studies. It's going to be a short paper. It's a 2,500 word paper that I have to submit to the conference. One of them will be this oil and gas drilling by Shell off the Wild Coast. And I dived into that quite a lot last time. So I don't know if I want to take up too much of your time again on that one, but, you know, basically pointing the irony of, you know, the ANC being literally invested in Shell through their investment wings. And, you know, Minister Montashe claims that that is just a shrewd investment on the ANC's behalf rather than a pretty blatant conflict of interest, which shows that they are working on behalf of Shell. And I kind of want to talk about how, you know, echoing colonizers before them, this push for oil and gas extraction is being, you know, and pushed under the guise of also being in the good of local communities, right? There's almost like a new civilizing mission that's not too far from the tongues of oil and gas officials. You could think about maybe Rudyard Kipling's like The Burden of the White Oil Man or something like that, who's coming there to deliver development to these backwards communities that are resisting oil and gas development, even though it's for their own good, right? When, you know, a lot of the evidence from those communities that have been impacted by oil and gas extraction suggests it does a lot of harm and leaves behind pretty toxic and harmful legacies. And here we can look at places like Mozambique and the Niger Delta and so on. And so, yeah, I think part of the thesis then will be, when it comes to the Shell case and also the broader sort of push for extractivism that the ANC is moving forward, is that they are enacting what Tsepo Madlingotsi calls sort of neo-apartheid, right, where they work to strengthen a lot of undemocratic systems that were prevalent during apartheid, like the tribal authorities systems, where, you know, the consent of communities is often overridden by unaccountable tribal authority, which can be quite excluding of broader voices. And so basically pointing to that, particularly in the Shell case, that's where Minister Montashe and the DMRE went to when faced with resistance, as they went straight to the traditional authorities to try get their buy-in in a very questionable set of engagements that they did there. Yeah, and so I think kind of what the overall push will be to say is that, you know, unfortunately, the ANC, which was once a very proud anti-colonial liberation movement, has now kind of been sucked into overseeing some pretty extractive neo-apartheid structures. And I think I'd turn to the words of Steve Biko here, who was quite prescient in warning against the fact that if you did not overturn the economic structures of apartheid, what you'd have would be, a small grouping of black faces, which would oversee the same sort of extractive structures that whites had beforehand. And so kind of bringing in some black consciousness analysis there to back that up, and kind of, talk about how this is a neo-colonial kind of push that's being done by the ANC. And yet they are the ones who are using this anti-colonial discourse and rhetoric, as well as claiming that, they're consistent with a just transition and so on. And then maybe I'll just quickly end off by talking briefly about my second case study. This one I haven't done as much detail on, but I'm going to hopefully be interviewing one of the main activists involved in this. He's the coordinator for something called Stop EACOP, and EACOP is the East African Crude Oil Pipeline. And that's happening in Tanzania and Uganda, and would be the biggest heated oil pipeline in the world. And that project has been supported by the presidents of both countries, Museveni and Magufuli. And it's often couched, when they give their support for the project, it's talked about in the terms of like the right to self-determination for African countries. It is talked about in terms of like, pushing back against the yokes of oppression from Western countries that won't allow them to develop their oil and gas. And it's also talked about in terms of how African countries are owed a climate debt, which means they should be allowed to benefit from fossil fuel extraction, right? But a lot of that rhetoric is kind of is problematic, because if you actually analyze who benefits from this project, it is not so much local communities, but rather foreign multinationals and corporations. And so this is where that rhetoric is duplicitously being used to actually benefit the same forces that they claim to be fighting against. And this can be seen from the fact that 60% of the EACOP project is owned by foreign multinationals. French oil giant Total owns 45%, and the China National Offshore Oil Company owns 15%, right? And meanwhile, many local communities are opposed to the project, as it is set to displace thousands of communities and damage vital ecosystems as well as water sources along the pipeline's nearly 1,500 kilometer route. And so I think what I'm trying to point to in these case studies is how climate justice and Africa's right to develop is actually used to the benefit of foreign multinational corporations. So it is a form of undermining demagoguery, right? And also, meanwhile, in a staggering form of, I guess, both projection and hypocrisy, those pushing the EACOP project pipeline, largely on behalf of foreign interests, have the audacity to accuse local communities who are resisting it as being foreign agents, right? And this parallels what's going on with Montashe and the DMRE, accusing everybody who's opposed to their push as being foreign funded or colonizers of a special kind. And so I think there is like both undermining demagoguery and like pretty clear hypocrisy and on display in these projects. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at right now. And that kind of brings me to sort of an overview of how the paper is developing. I've got to try somehow fit that all together into 2,500 words and make it a sound and strong analysis. But that's the kind of expanded abstract that I've given you. Hopefully that helps.
Okay. Alex, thanks. 2 minutes over time. I was going, Alex, and then I realized, oh my gosh, I was on mute. No wonder you couldn't. You got your 2 minutes
Apologies.
extra. Thanks to technology. But thank you. That was compact and really interesting. Questions, comments? Then maybe either just stick up your hand or just. Yes, Janet, am I hearing you?
Can you hear me? Yeah,
Yes.
I'm really interested in the
Can't
language.
see you, though.
Sorry, can you hear me?
We can hear you, but we can't see you.
Okay, you can see me here.
There, awesome.
Can you see me now?
Perfect.
this undermining demagoguery. And why I'm so interested is because I've had sort of first-hand experience of it from people who I consider, you know, colleagues and friends and even comrades. And they articulate this in the context of the Eastern Cape's underdevelopment and the need for investment to develop the Eastern Cape. So they talk about gas, offshore gas or shale gas as a game changer, and how this is, how if I articulate a position which says, you know, community decision-making about development options should be prioritized or should be given primacy, they say I'm undermining the development of the Eastern Cape and taking an anti-development position and compromising the provincial government's development agenda. And then that language is also then extended to the national agenda. And how I see it articulated, Alex, is in terms of the National Democratic Revolution, and that concept which is used to block or undermine local or community decision making. And I'm also just very aware at the moment of the use of the language of patriotism in the context of sort of xenophobia and populism, in the context of migrant labor and people who are part of our regional economy, as they have been for 2 centuries, but who are now being labeled as dangerous criminal foreigners, etc. And I mean, you know what, from what happened last week. So I engaged in various debates about this and was extremely concerned about ANC posters, which are equating immigrants with rapists and this kind of thing. So I don't know if you're familiar with this from what happened last week, but anyway, I don't want to go on to much about this, but I was basically shut down and I was told I was privileged and in an ivory tower, etc., because I used the terms xenophobia and populism, which is what I consider this kind of language to be doing. So it's a sort of battle of language, which is the same as one gets in the Communist Party, which has a very sort of statist notion of development. So they use the same sort of discourse. But anyway, I mean, I do think that there are important underlying development debates, which are about real policy issues. So it's not like we don't want any foreign investment. You know, we actually do need capital investment in the economy. So is it a question of which companies? Is it a question of which kind of companies? You know, what industries do we want to invest in? Anyway, there's a lot of interesting debates along those lines. But thanks, Alex.
Okay, Janet, thanks. I agree. I mean, one starts to get a rising anxiety because there's just so much stuff to think about here. Could we perhaps quickly just get Abigail's response and Marty's response, and then give you a chance to respond to all 3 at the end? Would that be all right? Given our very so okay, quickly, Marty, let's just hear from you quick.
Okay. Thanks, Alex. Yeah, I'm hugely encouraged and impressed with what you do, and grateful. I just want, it's just 2 things that I want to mention, and that is 10 years ago, I was part of a group of theologians who had a meeting with Wedi Montage and other members, and there were subsequent meetings as well. And we challenged them on their approach to the country. All these things that you mentioned, included in it was the Israel-Palestine issue, but also climate and economic and other things. Now, I need to highlight that I was the only white face in the group, and all my other colleagues are struggle veterans. So they have, you know, they really, some of them were imprisoned during the struggle. They really have vastly more experience than I do. But Guedimantages, and this is the point that I want to raise, and this was 10 years ago, said to us, he wants us as a group of theologians from different sections in the country to be embedded. That's the word that he used. He wanted us to be co-opted with them, to become part of them, to speak as they speak, to be part of them. And we said, no, we do not want to be embedded, we want to engage. But we realized in that meeting and also in the subsequent meetings that the door to critical, honest discussion is closed. It is closed. So that is the one thing that I want to highlight. And the other thing is that I'm very, very happy or pleased that you introduced me to Jason Stanley's work. I got the book, I read it. And also that you are now doing the work on highlighting why what they do is actually propaganda and how they undermine actually our democracy. One should probably surmise whether we are a democracy. In fact, yeah, so I just want to say thank you.
Okay, thanks, Marty. And Abigail?
Yeah, I think it kind of touches on what Janet and Marty have said. When you were speaking, Alex, I was just thinking about performative language, and J.L. Austin and Judith Butler are the two key texts that you can read around performative language, which is very, very interesting in your debates, and it could actually just solidify. So J.L. Austin and Judith Butler on the performative speech acts or performative languages. And I use performative speech acts and language in my doctoral studies about understanding how it creates specific affective atmospheres. So we can never undermine or underplay the role that language is performing. And it's performing in an affective space. So there's an agenda, and there's a specific agenda in the types of word choices that we make. And I don't think you can downplay enough that these specific framings of how this is benefiting local communities, how this is, that we need this investment, that it's spinning a different take on climate change as supporting the economy, supporting the people that haven't benefited, and even the term that you used about owed a climate debt. That there's this, again, this like kind of challenge against the colonizer, that this is our way of getting back from them, getting a return. And I think that's a really good take that's happening in the global south that isn't necessarily a discourse that's being expressed north, and that as we in the global south might be saying that we haven't yet felt the impact of climate change as vastly as those in the global north, just because of the kind of infrastructural changes that haven't happened here. I think that sort of shift in thinking is a very key area to actually analyze. And it's, I think that point that Martine raised about what she was exposed to about being embedded or engaged. Are you going to be embedded with me? And to be in bed with me in this, falsified propaganda that's being spun. So lovely takes, Alex, really, really interesting.
Okay. Thank you all. I'm going to give Alex a little bit of time. I mean, we are again now already over time. And one of the things, okay, but let's let Alex respond. And then I just want to raise a possibility with you after that. So Alex?
Thanks. I'll keep it brief because I've already overstayed my time, but I appreciate the encouraging and helpful comments and suggestions. I think there is a lot of work that needs to be done in a paper, which is going to be very short, about, what constitutes meaningful development and, why this is undermining demagoguery. So there is, I think, more work to be done to show like why this is not a fulfillment of the ideals it claims to be. And I think having some of the suggestions that you folks have around performative language, that sounds interesting. I'll definitely look into that, Abby. Thanks for that suggestion. And yeah, so yeah, maybe I'll just leave it there, is that there's a lot of work to be done. I think particularly with Janet's comments around what is the meaningful development that communities want. And I think part of that is the primacy of communities being able to say what they want, right? And so this has come back to the question of, you know, a standard that's Montashi and the DMRE have been pushing back against, which is free, prior, informed consent, where communities have the ability to say what they want in their communities. And as part of that is also a right to a sustainable and just alternative mode of development. And I think this comes to the question of what consent really means, because if your choice is between oil and gas development or starvation, then that's no choice at all as well, right? And I think this is where government failure also creates the grounds in which this extractive industry can come making promises, because there's no other alternatives to be had. And so I guess making that analysis of the propaganda and the false developments against the backdrop of a failure of development and a failure of the state is going to be a challenging one. But yeah, thanks everybody. I appreciate that input.
Okay. Alex, thanks. There's much more we could be talking about. And one of the ideas that popped into my head, maybe I'll just float it here, is that we could potentially offer a series of single talks by postdocs, so that you have the floor, you offer a lecture or a public lecture, a talk on your thing, and then you have a good long session for engagement and discussion. If that's something that interests you, then drop me an email and maybe we can set up hopefully maybe an in-person or in-person hybrid event where you actually present something, present an article, and then we kind of you know, we really get into it, and we spend a lot of time on it, because I feel like we've had far too little time now and we're already way over time. Janet, quick.
Just to say, our master's program on social movements, social change and development next week is an online module, and Alex is taking one session. It's like a 2-hour session on climate justice movement. So maybe I should send out the invitation to you and you can invite other participants as well.
Yes, we could distribute it among ourselves. That would be great. This is the kind of interactive engagement that I would like to encourage amongst all of us, so that yeah, we kind of, I think there's lots to be kind of gained by chatting, but in much more detail. Yeah, so that would be wonderful, Janet. Thank you. Okay, so as this is almost an overview session, but I think so that's why we will have to, in a way, hurry through it. But I think that this would be an excellent kind of idea, is to then have longer sessions where we focus just on one topic and really get into it. Okay, so drop me an email if you're interested in offering a lecture, and we will make it happen. Just to welcome Joseph, I think is here, and Fiona, a fellow host as well. I'm glad to see you here. So welcome. Okay, so I think Mvuzo might still be struggling to, I don't see him here. Mvuzo, are you hidden anywhere? Okay, so I think we will then move on to Joseph and to Jenna. Jenna did ask if she could present without her video on, or I can't remember whether it's on or off now, but whatever you like. Let's ask Jenna to take the floor, and then Joseph will respond, and then after that Joseph will present and Jenna will respond. Okay. So Jenna.
Thanks very much, Andrea. Yes, so when I present, if it's okay with everyone, I'm just going to switch my camera off because I'm going through a bit of a health battle at the moment, so it's very difficult for me to focus on the camera and on the laptop and on my work at the same time. But while my camera is on, I just want to say that what I'm presenting today is a huge departure from my actual project, which is on comedy and humor. And that's because about 2 weeks ago, the Psychology and Psychological Research International Journal asked me to be part of the editorial board. So I thought, yes, great, I'm going to put on my CV, wonderful. And then they contacted me at the end of last week and said I need to please submit an article related to psychology by the end of the month. So I thought this is going to be a good opportunity to get your feedback. So it's very new. I'm just running with ideas here. Yeah, so I think that'll be very beneficial for me. And then, Andrea, can I share screen, please?
Yes.
Okay, there we go. Okay. So to bring it into psychology, I thought, yeah, I'm going to look at the mental health crisis and call it our other pandemic. I'm not sure why okay, there we go. So my basic intro would be that, you know, the COVID pandemic has exposed like a number of frailties and vulnerabilities of contemporary society. So I'll start by just mentioning that, like structural inequities of the healthcare systems, of our government, of our education sector, and even the economy. But my main point is that the pandemic has also really shone a light on a global mental health crisis. And I'm going to be calling this our other pandemic. And my point I want to make is that while it is safe to say that the pandemic has contributed to the ubiquity of mental illness, especially during the early stages with lockdown regulations, you know, which enforce social distancing and isolation and that kind of thing, the pandemic itself does not account for our current mental health crisis. So what I want to do is the overall aim of my article would be to connect the rise in mental disorders with neoliberal capitalism. And I want to look at the numerous sites of economic, physical, and psychical suffering under neoliberal capitalism, which can account for mental illnesses or the growth or the increase in mental illness. And I will need to point out that when I refer to economic and physical suffering, they all have a psychical component in that, as I will explore later in the article, if you're suffering from debt, you're going to suffer from anxiety and depression. So I just want to, you know, keep in mind that even if I refer to economic or physical suffering under neoliberal capitalism, it does have a psychic effect or an effect on the psyche. So in my introduction, I plan on just providing a background about the COVID pandemic, and then I would go into defining mental illness. So at this stage, I'm not quite sure. Can you hear me, Andrea? Am I loud enough?
Jenna, you're fine. Your PowerPoint is not moving. I don't know if it's supposed to move or not, but we can certainly hear you.
Yes, it is supposed to move. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay, I'm just going to leave it like that then.
Perfect.
Okay, so in my introduction, I will just speak about the COVID pandemic and a bit of background there, and then go into defining mental illness. Now, at this stage, I'm not quite sure if I want to focus on a specific one, like just anxiety or perhaps anxiety and depression, or I'm not quite sure where I'm heading there yet. And then also in the introduction, I would just provide current statistics regarding mental disorders at a global scale. And then the next part of the article, I plan on going on to defining neoliberal capitalism. So here I want to refer to academic economist David Kotz and his understanding of neoliberal capitalism. So he argues that it rests on a number of fundamental imperatives. First, the deregulation of business and finance. So it's basically liberating free or private enterprises from state control and regulation, you know, under the guise that like an unregulated market will increase economic growth with a trickle-down effect, arguing that everyone will ultimately benefit, which of course we know is not true at all. And second, Kotz argues that the doctrine is marked by the drastic cutting of public expenditure for social services. So basically reducing the safety net of the poor. And then he also argues about the privatization of the economy. So that's like selling state-owned enterprises, goods and services to private investors in the name of greater efficiency. But once again, all that happens is the rich get richer, you know, the 1% benefit, certainly not the rest of us. And then he also argues that a tax on trade unions by big businesses and the state has transformed the labor market so that capital now fully dominates labor, resulting in a shift in the labor process from long-term employment to temporary and part-time work, which we see all the time. And then fifth, and this is the final one I'll concentrate on for defining neoliberal capitalism, is the introduction of market principles in the workplace and increasingly in public life. So basically the regime eliminates the concept of community by replacing it with individual responsibility. So he argues that neoliberal capitalism is founded on a system of meritocracy and extreme competition. And of course, like, you know, neoliberal capitalism is a complex concept, but I'm going to try and narrow it down to these points made by Kotz. Now, you know, to draw a connection between mental disorders and neoliberal capitalism, I'm going to narrow it down and look at 4 particular scholars. So first up would be, you know, post-Marxist philosophers Michael Hart and Antonio Negri. And they say in their book Declaration, they argue that, you know, neoliberal capitalism has fabricated new figures of subjectivity, and one of them that they name is the indebted. You know, subjectivity is produced by the hegemony of finance and banks and constructed on the foundational basis of debt. And they point out that while debt begins as an external constraint, it later worms its way inside one's subjectivity in the form of responsibility. You are responsible for your debts, and guilt for the difficulties they create in your life. And they comment below, and this is like just such a pertinent quotation. The indebted is an unhappy consciousness that makes guilt a form of life. Little by little, the pleasures of activity and creation are transformed into a nightmare for those who do not possess the means to enjoy their lives. So in this light, you know, the indebted would be their contemporary non-dialectical counterpart of Hegel's slave. Debt is a negation that cannot enrich you or liberate you, but rather can only deepen the impoverishment of your life and the depotentialization of your subjectivity. The figure of the indebted cannot be redeemed, but only destroyed. And I find this such a powerful statement. You know, how society is these days, especially after COVID and the inflation of everything. So next, I would look at Ian Parker's theory about obsessional neurosis. Andrea, am I okay for time?
No, you have about a minute.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so Ian Parker's theory about obsessional neurosis. So he argues in Lacanian psychoanalysis, Revolutions in Subjectivity, that human behavior under the social and economic conditions characteristic of capitalism are reminiscent of the behavior of the obsessional neurotic. So he identifies it as a system of rituals that inhibit and imprison the mind of a particular individual, such as repetition, hesitation, uncertainty, anxiety, procrastination, self-doubt, and guilt. And he specifically speaks about how under capitalism, our psychic suffering comes in the form of production and consumption. What are we going to buy? Trying to decide, like all the consumer options we have. What are we going to buy? What are we going to do? Oh, and now I have to quickly go. So Renata Salekel, she's a Slovene philosopher, sociologist, and legal theorist. And in her book Choice, she speaks about this, that the current dispensation, which advocates the freedom of the individual, such as the freedom to choose one's identity, religion, sexual orientation, even one's gender these days, has led to an increase in feelings of anxiety, uncertainty, as well as those of guilt and inadequacy, traits associated with obsessional neuroses. So I go into depth about that. That's about 2 pages, but now I'm running out of time. And the last person I'm going to speak about would be Paul Verhage's idea about working conditions and mental illness. So in his book, What About Me? The Struggle for Identity in a Market-Based Society, the Belgian professor provides documented evidence on the psychic costs of living in a market-based economy. You know, and he argues that mental disorders are moral disorders and that they're psychological manifestations of broader social problems. And so I don't want to go in depth because I'm running out of time there, but he provides all the statistics of how working conditions and individualism and competitiveness in the workplace has become our new moral values and how we relate to ourselves, our own identities, and others. And that would be it. Thanks, Andrea.
Okay, thanks, Jenna. Could we maybe just ask Joseph to respond to you, and then we'll open up for questions. Could you maybe unshare your screen? Thank you. Okay, Joseph.
Good morning, Prof, and good morning, everyone. Part of my feedback, am I audible enough, Prof?
You are audible, yeah. Might be a good idea. Could we see you, or is that a problem with bandwidth?
I'm actually connecting from my phone because my laptop failed me earlier on. Hence, I was hanged on, so I switched on to a cell phone. But I want to believe that somehow there's a little bit of visibility for those who can see, because I'm not sure how the cell phone monitor will
it's fine, it's perfect, yeah.
Okay. Actually, I want to comment Jenaline on the topic. However, I find myself not stepping into the same footing with her because the topic is about a mental health crisis. And maybe I as a reader, maybe I have my particular take on the subject to say I was patiently waiting to hear where the crisis is. When you say mental health crisis, another pandemic, to say there's a crisis maybe in the public hospital, there's a crisis in the private, and where the crisis is, because to me, crisis refers to a time of difficulty or a state of danger, to say this is the danger of the health system, maybe in the country, and maybe coin it maybe to a specific province. Say, for example, she'll be looking at the Eastern Cape mental health crisis, to say we only have maybe one hospital in the entire Eastern Cape, and maybe it's overpopulated and so forth. But I might have taken her topic with a skewed mind. The other thing is, like I said, I could not connect well on the title of her work vis-a-vis the content and the theories that she has just cited. Say, for example, neoliberal capitalism, to say how it has affected or how does that assist in her title or in a study on the mental health crisis. The other thing is, it is very prudent or very key that when we take theories, they need somehow to assist us in strengthening our argument. Like I'm saying, I could not find the right footing, maybe to comprehend the title vis-a-vis some of the theories that they were used or highlighted. And what I can also comment on again is her voice should be heard, because she is steering the ship, to say what is her position, to say in my observation, while I was at, I don't know Eastern Cape quite well, at the mental institution, my observation is 1, 2, 3. So that she could speak from whatsoever experience or observation that she has observed on the ground. The other point that I would want to bring up, it's clearly outlining the aim of the study. What is it that she aims to achieve by writing this article, to say, at the end of the day, this is what the study aims to achieve. Maybe it will assist to give an advice to the Minister of Health to look into the mental health crisis, like we once had the life acid humanis and so forth, where there was a crisis. People, they were moved from the particular facility to the NGO facilities. The other thing is to be clinical on conceptual framework and the research methodology, to say what research methodologies or methodology is she going to use to collect whatsoever her data and to make the analysis to that, to say this is the state of the mental health crisis in South Africa, Eastern Cape Province, to be specific, because if you say a mental health crisis, another pandemic, without contextualizing it to give it a particular context, it becomes a broad subject. I think that is the far I can go with my comments, Prof. Thanks a lot.
Perfect. Thanks, Joseph, and thank you very much for keeping within time. That was absolutely perfectly timed comments. Thanks so much. Jenna, perhaps we should take 1 or 2 comments from the floor, and then you can respond to all of them towards the end. Would you be okay with that?
Yes, that's perfect. Thanks, Andrea.
Okay. I see Nomalanga has her hand up, and she's also put some stuff in chat. So Nomalanga, would you like to speak to your comments?
Yes, I'm so sorry. I'm in a rural area here, just capturing network. So excuse me for the noise if you hear it. I just want to say, Jenna, your work is very important, extremely important, but you have to be braver than you realize to do it. Because you see what's happened, just limit the way Joseph has approached your work, is that it's just demonstrated the very problem of the use of the term mental health to describe what I would just call a species response to a very destructive system. And Joseph and I think it's still most Black people, when they mean mental health, they mean mental health. We mean mental health. We mean mental health, you know, and we mean go and be specific about the psychiatric and psychological profiles that are emerging under stress. And specifically though, and how the health system manages it. But I think now we see this overlap, because I think if I look at the way we have grown up, mental health disorders, and I mean here severe psychiatric disorders, were very prevalent because of the way that especially apartheid operated on Black people, and that's just Fanon. So I'm not the biggest fan of Fanon, but you may need to demonstrate your awareness of that whole Black traditional critique of capitalism and colonialism, and in South Africa, of course, apartheid, because those are all linked. Black people have been telling the story for ages, that this system is insane and it makes people insane, and Fanon says that, and the religious leaders will also say the same thing. But the trouble is that it looks like a conservative position now. It looks like a conservative position, because I hear you using words like moral, like normative, too much choice. Those are religious concepts. So you need to be a bit braver in how you weave it. And I think what I'm very pleased with what your work is doing is that it seems to be trying to speak within the discourse of psychology as it is right now. And I think that's going to be very key. I would almost think you will find a lot of this critique in almost all religious traditions right now. You will find it in Black theology as a specific kind of critique of the world. And I think Alex mentioned the Biko position on things. So the critique is not new. It's not new, but that what's happening is psychology needs to reevaluate its own complicity in how it has characterized logical unhappiness with the structures of the world economy to simply something that then they try to medicalize or therapeutic or deal with through therapeutic means. So I'll just say that, and let me just conclude by saying, you know, we've been dealing with this in the universities. And about now almost a decade ago, I confronted some of this at Rhodes, and I had to say that disorders begin in affluent communities in certain ways, and then they become medicalized. So there's a whole nother element of a class division in how mental anxieties are viewed as urgent as they emanate from over affluence, as opposed to how mental anxieties are emerging in working class and poor people communities, or in indigenous and native and rural populations that cannot fathom the system. So this mental health crisis is the one that you're speaking to, is the one that's coming out of affluent kids, affluent people, the ones who are, anyway, so yeah, those ones, now suddenly, oh, there's mental health everywhere. Well, guess what? It's been. So I think your work is important, and you'll encounter a lot of pushback, especially if you start critiquing, for example, in the North, the global North, the current, well, in my view, what has turned to become quite a misogynistic, anti-female, anti-productive, anti-female gender and sex politics that presents itself as radical, but is almost at the heart of it, almost nihilistic. Those are very difficult things to convey, but I think good luck.
Thank you. It sounds like I need it.
Thank you. There's so much in there. I get that feeling again that we could have had one seminar with just this one topic and a whole lot of engagement. Janet, you have your hand up, and Claudia has hers up. Is yours an old hand, Janet?
You know, it actually was an old hand, but I'm just going to very quick comment to make on this, which is about the neoliberal global economy. And I think your definition is correct, but just in terms of the local and the point that was made about how you're applying this to the Eastern Cape or to the local context, is you have to be careful about a sort of blanket assessment of our South African political economy as a neoliberal capitalism, and there are a number of reasons for that, but I won't go into that. But I'm just saying you have to be a bit careful about your global analysis and your local analysis and the relationship between the two. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Janet. And Claudia, quick sticks, and then we'll give Jenna a little bit of a chance to respond.
Thanks, Jenna. It's really interesting work. I think my comment follows on from the others in a way. So I in a sense I've been having this conversation with my mom a little bit, because she is a clinical psychologist who works in state, or has worked in state for a long time, and the COVID pandemic and the effects on it of people with who've had mental health problems before. And so it's definitely something that is out there and is being published about in clinical journals. My question really is a lot of the discussions that you're presenting on the effects of COVID on financial stability, for want of a better word, on mental health. Could these things not be applied to, for example, times of recession or economic depression? What makes this specifically a COVID-related study? That's my question.
Okay.
Thanks, Claudia. Thanks, everyone, actually, for the feedback. Okay, so then I need to restructure how I'm doing the article, because it's not COVID related. I use COVID as a springboard to say that COVID has highlighted, I feel, like mental health disorders, that we really have a mental health issue. COVID has just highlighted that. It's always been there, but it's, to me, it seems like in the media and everything, that it's highlighted and exposed it and brought it to a more visible level where people are talking about it more. So then I have to really be careful in my wording, because I don't want people to get the idea that it's like directly related to COVID, because that's the opposite. I don't feel it is. I feel I'm trying to make a connection between neoliberal capitalism and mental illness. And I also think, with the feedback from you guys, that I really need to lock down you know, my definition of mental illness. And I think for that reason, I might turn to just doing anxiety, or doing anxiety and depression, rather than, you know, this overarching category. And then I also thank you so much, Joseph, for your feedback. I also need to make it clear that I'm not looking at like the Eastern Cape or hospitals or something like that specifically. I'm taking a psychoanalytical look on a global scale, so all over. So I'm not looking just at America or just at South Africa or Australia or anything like that. It's an overall look, you know, trying to take a psychoanalytical approach and to try and explain from a psychoanalytic perspective why there's been such an increase in mental health. And those specific philosophers that I look at highlight certain things that really do contribute to anxiety and depression in particular. So that's what I'm thinking about. And now I'm not quite sure the approach I'm going to take on the article.
Okay.
No,
Jenna,
that's my feedback.
yeah. Yes, I'm afraid we have to move on. I'm sorry about time again.
Yes, sorry.
But yes, lots to think about, and I think that's great. The feeling of being unsure after feedback like this is excellent. That's exactly that discomforting. Oh my gosh, I wonder, you know, how I can rethink this a bit. That's really valuable. So thank you all for that. We do have to move on, so I'm going to ask Joseph to present, and then Jenna will respond to Joseph. So Joseph, could you do your thing in 10 minutes?
Thanks, Prof. I will not share anything because my laptop is still running mad at the moment. I will try to find a way, how do I swim to the end? The topic of my article is exploring and assessing the usefulness of oral tradition in secondary school curriculum based on Bakwena Bamogopa press poem. Basically, that is the title of my article. The article actually is, like I said, is exploring the role and the usefulness of press poetry in schools, especially in the curriculum, because when you look into the current CAPS curriculum and assessment policy statement, it has scrapped that element of press poetry, or the element of folklore. So my title is making some kind of an alignment to say we need to decolonize the Eurocentric mindset that seeks to undermine folklore in general, or the African orature in general, and to demystify that it is an erstwhile study, which is quite uninteresting. And the argument that the article is bringing forward is that part of the praise poetry or folklore in general can be of assistance, you know, in addressing societal issues or societal ills that we witness today amongst different communities or in the society. The other thing that the study is also looking at is the pervasive misconceptions that seeks to say praise poetry is only meant for older people. For some reasons, the youth are not interested into praise poetry, and it brings the relationship actually between praise poetry and what the youth enjoy or like the most, which is rapping, because there are elements of similarity between praise poetry and rapping. If rapping to the youth and to the rappers, it's something that is cool, and we can also make praise poetry to be of the same taste as well. And the article also is using creative arts for grade 8 and 9 as one of the later steps, to say if learners at grade 8 and 9 in arts and culture, in creative arts, I mean to say, not arts and culture, in creative arts, they are taught praise poet, wherein it becomes part of their PET. PET is a practical task assessment. They perform and they're given marks for that. And why can't it be a continuity into the FET, into grade 10 to grade 12? And apart from that, praise poems form part of the 4 language aspects, which is reading and viewing. So they can be given a poem to read, and they can view it, and they can answer particular questions to that. It could be part of the speaking, listening and speaking as well, that somebody else will recite a praise poem and others will be listening, and then for some reasons others will ask questions at the end of the day. So for some reasons there's an alignment, but unfortunately CAPS has created a gap to scrape it off. And when we look as well, the paper will argue that white paper 6, education white paper 6, speaks about inclusion in education. So therefore, the culture and the language of other people should be included rather than to be excluded. So it will also argue to say education white paper 6 is backing up. The other thing that the paper argues is that much as in poems, the current prescribed poems, there are poetic devices. In praise poems as well, we have poetic devices. So it's not a question that when they bring back praise poems or praise poetry, they are stripping away the poetic devices. So poetic devices will always be there. Proverbs also will always be there. So for some reasons, it's not taking away the core curriculum to teach learners the poetic techniques or poetic devices that are there. So they will still learn, but in the process of learning, it will assist to give them the true identity of who they are, because praise poetry becomes your identity, especially us as Africans, to say, who are you? Like in my case, if somebody else asks me who I am, I cannot really say I'm Joseph. I'll associate myself with the clan name to say I'm Mukwena. I belong to the crocodile clan. So, but if for one reason or the other, praise poems are not taught, that rich culture goes away, and you cannot separate culture from language. So the language of literature in schools should not be separated from the culture of the people. I think that will be my article. In short, I want to pause there for now.
Sorry about that. I'm on mute again. Okay, so Joe, thank you. Wonderful. Do I call you Mukwena or do I call you Joseph?
Mukwena is still fine.
Okay, I'm going to do that. So in for future all the time or just for now? How does this? Well, we'll discuss that
all the time. That's my branding.
Is that your real? Okay, Mukwena. Okay. So what we'll do is ask Jenna to respond, and then we'll take up the discussion after that for a few minutes. Jenna?
Okay, thanks, Andrea. Thanks so much, Joseph. I can see that you're very passionate about the subject matter, and it does come through when you're writing. So when I was reading the work that you sent me. So I just think that when you're writing your article, you need to clearly state, and I would say validate, why you have chosen to focus on secondary schools. I want to know that as a reader. And also, why have you chosen to focus on the praise poetry of Bakwena? If I pronounce that right, I'm so sorry if I don't. And then you also mentioned in the work that you sent me that your study should decolonize the Eurocentric mindset that seeks to undermine African languages as official languages and change perceptions made about humanities. So this last part is a bit unclear for me. I'm not quite sure what you mean by changing perceptions made about humanities. So just in that part of the document you sent me, if you can expand on that. And then also in the beginning of the document, you argue that the curriculum and assessments in the school should be revised in order to focus on African folklore. And you mentioned grade 10 to 12. But then you suggest on implementing praise poetry in grades 8 and 9. So I'm just unsure about that. If you could just clarify in your article that. And then your main aims are to prove that praise poetry remains part of African culture and heritage. And to this end, your aim is to make a call to the Department of Basic Education to infuse praise poetry in the CAPS curriculum. But at no stage do you say how you are going to go about this. So like as a reader, I just want to know like the steps or procedures you're going to follow to make this happen. Like, are you going to reach out to the DBE in your province? Like what kind of efforts are you going to go to for that? So I just want a clear laid out plan for that. And then you also mentioned creating a platform for the youth to love their own language. Again, I just want specifics on that. Like, how are you going to do that? And then your last aim is to demystify. Am I running too long, Andrea?
No, you're fine.
Okay. The last aim is to demystify the misconception that praise poetry is for older people. And you mentioned in your work that you're going to address this by pointing out the similarities between rapping, which is mostly associated with the youth, and praise poetry. But I'm not sure what capacity you're going to explore this. Like, will the similarities between the genres or poetry styles be made clear in the school curriculums? Or how would you institute that? And then lastly, you provide a very good definition of praise poetry, which you got from Google Dictionary. But then I would like to argue that in the spirit of wanting to decolonize language and in an effort to really support your passion about wanting to preserve African culture and heritage, I would opt for trying to find a definition of praise poetry by an African scholar or writer or author. So that's all my feedback. If I went too fast, I'm more than happy to like just email it through to you, and then you can check it when you have more time. So thanks very much, Joseph.
Okay, thanks, Jenna. That's actually also a good idea, is that if you want to communicate further with each other or with the person who responded to your talk, then please go ahead and email one another. That would be great to stay in contact. What we will do for the next symposium is mix you up, so that you will be responding to a different person next time. But in the meantime, if you want to carry on corresponding, that would be great. Again, now, Joseph, do you want to respond a little bit to Jenna first? I'm not saying, I should say Bakwena, hey? And then perhaps we can open the floor to one or two questions.
I can respond if time permits, Prof. The first question that I captured is to give a validate reason why secondary schools. I think when you look into the curriculum, language curriculum in particular, let me not be too generic than to be specific. If you look at the language curriculum, from grade 10 to grade 12, that is where literature is quite intense in secondary schools. And that is where we have challenges in secondary schools where there is bullying, where there are fights and so forth and so forth. So it is a stage where we need to, for some reasons, mold the youth as and when they leave the mainstream schooling, they become better citizens. So my specific focus is on secondary because those are the youth who, for some reasons, might be battling with identity crisis, not knowing who they are, and so forth. I want to believe that that's the reason why, if I might attempt to validate the reason why secondary schools, and maybe it is because of my experience. I worked in secondary school since my first year doing practicals, and it was my first time employment again to work in secondary school. So I've studied the behavior of the youth for the years that I've worked for 21 years. And then why specifically the praise poem of Bakwena? Not necessarily that because I belong to the clan. It is because I have abstracted it from my thesis. So my approach to that is that if we put these praise poems in particular in the school curriculum, say for example the praise poem of Bakwena, Bamakgopa, that clan, particular clan, they will be in the know of their own praise, even if maybe their praise is not being introduced to them from their homes or by their parents. Because my argument is that praise poems in general, but I'm just using Bakwena Bamakgopa as an example to say whatever devices that are there in any other, they are also there. The perceptions made on humanities, colleagues can agree or disagree with me. It's okay. African languages are undermined, and I speak as an African language teacher. African languages are undermined when, for example, CAPS documents are developed. African language teachers were not called. English people were called, and they developed the CAPS document, and it was given to us as African language educators to say, translate it into your own languages. So we always take cue from English. Hence, I'm saying the perceptions of undermining humanities specifically, I'm referring to, or to be specific, I'm referring to the African languages. The documents will be developed in English, and then they will be given to us to translate into our own languages. So that is the perception that we need to mystify that, to say we have the same equal status as any other 11 official language in the country.
Okay.
Yeah,
Time.
because of time, I wanted to pause there to say, because of time, I wish to pause there. I won't answer all the questions because for one reason or the other, they were too long. Sure.
No, that's fine. I mean, you can engage with these as you know, further beyond this the seminar. I just would like to give a voice first to Nomalanga and then to Claudia for 2 comments, and then yeah, maybe a brief response from you after that. Nomalanga.
No, thanks. I have to try and get in as much as I can before I run out of bundles. But I just wanted to say that I think Jenna Lee's questions are helpful in terms of structuring a very precise paper. And I think the scope of how you contextualize the stuff is going to be so interesting, because it is in the end about asking why the clan poetry isn't a standard, because for most speakers of any language, you need to know the clan names and poems of other people. So everybody will know my clan name as Mkhize. I don't have to teach it to them. It's something they know. So the issue is why our curriculum doesn't reflect that mode of learning. And I think there is a relationship between the absence of those normative teachings that come in those poems and the clash with the kind of aspirational westernization that we live with today. And I think that is what you are probably seeing in the system, but it's very difficult to tease out. And it's funny because it turns out your work is actually the other side of what Jenna's work is. it's the world in which people have idiom and words and names that belong to a world where it doesn't matter what car you drive, you know what I mean? You don't have to be a big person to be mkwena, and you know the meaning of that and the pride it gives you. So I think those are very interesting things. And I think I'd be interested in the end to see how it relates to the way English literature is taught. I'm not sure, and maybe even Afrikaans literature, although I think even Afrikaans literature has its own history. So it would be interesting at some point to have a comparative thing. And I think English is the dominant one, where we get it right with English in some way, but we get it wrong for everyone else.
Yes, okay, thank you. Sure. There's again so much to talk about. But we do have to move on. I'm sorry about this. Claudia?
Yeah, I'll be quick. So, I mean, I really like this idea of praise poetry as rap, because having done some teaching in secondary schools as well, when it was still arts and culture, I can see how this would really appeal to students, and especially in terms of the decolonial argument, because it also brings praise poetry out of this very stagnant, this is a pre-colonial practice, into a more dynamic cultural practice. And so I really like that idea. Just a little suggestion is maybe to include things like Kwaito and hip hop as well, not just to be more inclusive, but also because those genres include sampling. So you can borrow from other musical practices, so that would allow for the use of songs that students like, for example, or other poems that they like, or even indigenous instruments that could be included into that. So it's a more organic practice that allows borrowing. So that would just be a little suggestion on my part.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. And Abby, do you want to just quickly talk to your comment?
Yeah, Joseph, just to let you know, I taught high school drama for many years. So I could be a good person just to cross ideas with regarding your creative arts idea of integrating praise poems into performance art pieces for the grade 8 to 9 learners. There's definite, I could give you some good helpful ideas there in integrating it into curriculum, so that you can actually have a clear output that you put together in your paper for how we could, you know, pose these ideas that you're raising in constructive, helpful ways into getting them into actual school practice.
Okay, wonderful. I'm seeing a very nice dynamic of music and drama, performance, and praise poetry. I think you could actually make something wonderful. So please keep connected, everybody. Joseph, do you want a quick, I'm going to keep saying Joseph. Would you like a quick response to that?
Prof, thanks for all the positive contributions that colleagues are bringing forth. I will see how best do I then quaint all the suggestions, and I will also have some offsite discussion or talks with colleagues to fit into the paper. Thanks for their inputs and for being given the chance to be presenting.
Okay, thank you so much. Yes. Great. All right, let's move on to another partnership. Marty and Busisiwe, shall we maybe get Busisiwe? We haven't heard your voice. Let's hear you first.
Hi, everyone. Can you see me?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. Okay, good day, everyone. Good to see you once again. And thank you for this opportunity, Andrea. What I am presenting today is almost like a synopsis of a book chapter that I'm busy with. I responded to a call, to a book chapter call on a book learning for livelihoods, skills and the informal sector. So I've put an abstract there in response to that call. So what I'm going to be putting here, presenting here, is more or less what the book chapter will be arguing. So I've termed the title Promoting Local Livelihoods to Achieve Food Security. As you know, that my focus is on enhancing food security. And I'm looking at the community-based participatory action research approach. I think to start off, it's looking at top-bottom approaches, that the pursuit of top-bottom approaches towards the realization of social changes in the communities should be invariably driven by local actors and not driven by outsiders, because outside perspectives are unlikely to know exactly what the socioeconomic context of those communities is. So the only people who can truly know their situation within a community are those who live in it. So the book chapter argues that the community-based participatory action approach is one of the most effective pathways to promote local livelihoods. The community-based participatory action employs a bottom-up approach, and it promotes changes desired by the community, where a more local community ownership becomes the emphasis. So the book chapter also argues that local livelihood strategies can and must be designed to encourage local economies to thrive sustainably in order to reduce household food insecurity. So the chapter also discusses how community-driven development interventions are extremely effective in promoting local livelihoods. Specifically, 3 assertions are outlined as to why community-based participatory action approach is one of the most effective pathways to promote livelihoods. The first assertion is that CBPAR actively considers the needs of the people to be impacted. The second assertion is that it allows for effective inclusion of marginalized communities and vulnerable communities. And the third one is that it is a localized approach, and that community-driven development can really target those marginalized groups, and because they are often forgotten in economic development. So the book goes on to describe the socioeconomic context, within which the whole research was actually based, which is Ward 60 of Nelson Mandela Bay, here in the Eastern Cape in Gqeberha. And it also describes the findings of the previous, of the phase 1 of the research in terms of the food insecurity. It also describes that majority of households are food insecure, about 77.4% food insecure, and that only about 6.3% is food secure. It also shows that the income is mostly from grants, from social grants, and that the community, within the community itself, we have about 74% unemployment rate. So I also described the theoretical framework, which is actually the underlying framework for the study, which is the community-based participatory action research approach. And it is combined with asset-based community development and sustainable livelihoods approach. The ABCD approach considers local assets as the building blocks for sustainable livelihoods of the people. So the framework builds on the skills of the local community residents, their strengths, and the strengths of the local associations. the supportive functions of local institutions and the natural environment endowments. And it draws upon existing community strengths to build more vibrant and sustainable communities. And the reason why also I've included the sustainable livelihoods approach is because it is about empowerment of the most vulnerable and poor through strengthening of their capacity to achieve secure livelihoods. So in terms of how the data was collected, it was through the ABC workshop and also through a skills inventory. You know, that was a household skills inventory. The ABCD approach was conducted with the Ward 60 community members as part of the community-based participatory collaborative process to give them an opportunity to express themselves and to discover what they need, to co-create a vision and goals, that is short-term, medium, and long-term goals for their community, to map out the assets that are available in the community, to map and evaluate the current interventions aimed at promoting food security in the community, as well as map the opportunities and strengths available in the community, and that they could learn from one another and in expressing their creative potential. So the skills inventory also was conducted, and each household was expected to identify the skills of its household members by ticking them from a list of 40 skills. And the results showed that there was a variety of skills within the households that ranged from housekeeping skills, cleaning, cooking, baking, laundry, followed by painting, gardening, fencing, and sewing. Sports and singing were also amongst the most selected skills, and others were hairstyling, computer, vocational, building, plastering, plumbing, carpentry, electrical work, welding, and tiling. The least common skills were creative skills such as art, craft, pottery, knitting, and crocheting. So the house skills inventory results suggested that households had varied assets in terms of those skills and capacities that can be harnessed to secure sustainable livelihoods. So the application of community-based participatory collaborative processes provided insights that households can turn their portfolio of assets into desired livelihood outcomes, which can generate income, improve well-being, reduce vulnerability, and improve food security. Efforts to use household livelihood strategies to increase livelihood outcomes or develop more secure income sources to economic well-being and food security could allow households to purchase food and to reduce food insecurity. So building local livelihoods, though it will not be a short-term, but rather a long-term sustainable solution to promoting sustainable livelihoods, is much appreciated. The community-based participatory action collaborative process provides an opportunity for program effectiveness, intervention, appropriateness, and sustainability. And the book chapter concludes that community-based participatory collaborative relationships can produce the most effective community-driven livelihoods programs to reduce food security. Yeah, and that the recommendation is that the development of local capacity through community-based participatory actions is suggested as a means for improving program outcomes in promoting local livelihoods to reduce food insecurity. Yes, so that is it. That is what the book chapter aims to assert. Yes, so okay. I'm open to questions.
Thanks, Mrs. Siwe, and thank you also kindly for keeping within time. That's gives me a little bit less stress. I think what we'll do is ask Marty to respond to you, and then we'll take it from there.
Okay.
Okay, so over to you, Marty.
Thank you to both of you. Thank you for this overview. And was this very necessary work. I'm going to respond in terms of the abstract that you sent me and also in terms of what you said. And I must say, if I compare the two, I'm slightly not sure what the focus of the chapter is at this stage. When I read the abstract, I did not see that you mentioned the project. And I thought, my question then was, what is the approach? Is it a theoretic overview of different approaches that helps to achieve food security, or is it contextual? But certainly from your explanation, it became clear that you want to position it as contextual because you link it to the project. But what I am curious about, and maybe this is something that you can consider for the introduction, is tendencies in the world, or if you want to narrow it down in South Africa, what actually happens. And the reason why I ask this is I would like to understand what is the contribution of this chapter to scholarship. What do you offer that we don't know, that is new? And is it just stating that this is the best approach, or is it I think previously we talked about the fact that this case study can give you the tools to or a question that I asked in our previous online discussion was, if it is a case study, or if you and are you able to generalize then conclusions, or is it how do you treat this study? I'm unsure of that. So maybe if you can just give us the vocabulary and the scientific terms in terms of how the study was done, and what it tells us about policy making, maybe. Yeah, I'm a bit unvague, but I'm not exactly clear what the scope of the project is. But I'm curious to know what the tendencies in the world is. You probably have read it, the wonderful book by Joseph Stiglitz, Asymmetric. I can't remember the title now, but he wrote, I can send it to you, a wonderful book on tendencies in the world, the global north, in fact, to not follow this approach, and the necessity for exactly the kind of approach that you suggest. And then I would also like to understand a bit more, are there pitfalls or disadvantages to this approach? What do we, if we implement this approach, what do we need to be on the lookout for? What did you struggle with in the program, you know, so that it gives a good grasp on what one actually deals with. Yeah, I think that is the scope. Is it general, theoretic, global? Is it South Africa? Is it project specific? Is it theoretic? Is it contextual? Those things are the things that came up. Thank you.
Okay, sorry, I'm interrupting, but thanks so much. Yeah, and I shouldn't be interrupting. I think that Busisiwe can respond to you quite
okay.
further. Go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you, Mati. Those are very insightful questions, actually. I think we all know that food insecurity is a great challenge right now, and that we are really looking for solutions in terms of what can really be done. You know, the people are really, it's a situation that affects the majority of households, and it's a situation that is very serious. It is also contextual, especially in South Africa, even though it is a global issue, but it is contextual here. So even though the study was, you know, just focused, it's an ongoing study, by the way. This was just the first part, which is phase 1. So it is progressive, because what we will be doing as well is actually implementing some of the pathways that we are going to be finding out from the current the current project in terms of phase 2. So it is important, though, that one is able to cite what is the contribution thereof. The contribution is that whatever we learn, even after implementing, because it is progressive, that will also be able to assist in terms of similar communities, whatever findings and whatever progress that is made from this particular local community, it means then it can be able to be, transferred or to be repeated to other communities, in terms of, so the issue is, how do we actually enhance the household food security? Because the state at which it is now, it is very much alarming. In terms of the approach itself, the importance of the community-based participatory action approach, it is an approach that is almost like forgotten. And it's almost like to be able to look at it again within this particular context, and look at what the communities themselves, how they can contribute towards their own social change. As you heard when I began, I was talking about top-down approaches. And for most of us academics, we often fall into the pit in terms of whatever we find in terms of the findings of communities. We want to put it down the throat of communities and say, this is what needs to be done. But I find that it is also very important that communities must express themselves in terms of what is it that, how do they see themselves making that social change within their communities? What is it that can help them in terms of actually effecting the changes within their communities? So that is the essence. And as in terms of the pitfalls and challenges, I'm hoping that the book will also address those, because those are the lessons that one is actually learning in terms of this ongoing work. What have been the pitfalls? What have been the challenges? What have been the gains, in terms of this work? So it's work in progress. And yes, one is hoping that whatever insights that are drawn from this book chapter will assist even others in terms of how they can actually implement the same methodology to achieve the same results. I'm not sure whether I'm able to.
Fine, no, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
And can I just make one remark, and that is the title then. The title should then also reflect that this is actually linked to a real life, to a project.
Okay.
Because the title made me think that it is a general theoretical approach. That's what caused the confusion.
So maybe one could say case study.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that contribution.
Very quickly, Nomalanga is commenting about practicalities and maybe implementation further on than that. I also had quite a few kind of questions about that. And then Janet, maybe just comments from Nomalanga first and then from Janet, and then we'll have to move on a bit. Okay, Nomalanga.
Sorry, it was just a question about the asset or the household sort of analysis about the skills. I was just curious that you were saying this creative arts was the least common skill, and I thought that was interesting, and I wanted, maybe you could just give us more insight.
Yes, because there was a list of skills and households were required to indicate. In fact, the members of the households were required to indicate which skills they had, which skills they were interested in, and which skills they would want to learn. So most of those creative skills that are artistic, there was no response in terms of the members or household members in actually ticking those skills. Hence, one was able to read that there was not much, one could not read much in terms of, there were very few people who were actually responding that they had those creative and artistic skills, apart from the musical, you know. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Again, time. Janet.
Yeah, thanks. Bosisiwe, I'm really happy about this and your methodology, which I think is really valid. I'm not sure that it's new, that it's offering something that is new, and it's also certainly not a forgotten approach. But I think it's really important to, firstly, I mean, to define community, because if you're using Ward 1, all the households in Ward 1 as a community, I think that's quite difficult to do, but you have to say who the community is. And then, I mean, what you said, the action and the action research, you haven't got to that yet, because that's the implementing the pathways that the community decides on, as you put it. So it needs to be clear that you haven't actually implemented the action research part of it yet. And then the last thing, which I think is the most important sort of insight, is the tension between local agency and the global structure or the structural constraints. And this is the big debate in development theory. I mean, it is the debate. So if you want to look for a strong sort of theoretical intervention, then that's where it comes in. So it's about, so it's not about that there is food insecurity, although there's a huge debate in South Africa about how that's defined and measured and how hungry are people actually. I mean, it's a very important debate, but it's not what you are addressing. I think what you're addressing is more this question of, what are the constraints on local action and local decision making? And I mean, we see that in the Kolobeni case, which Alex has been looking at. Anyway, it's a very interesting question. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Janet. Bosisiwe, a tiny little response. I'm sorry, we really do have to move on.
Okay, no, I think it's just about considering the points that Janet is actually putting forward, and yeah, looking into how then one could actually pick into structure to even to address the debates, the current discourse.
Yes. Yes, I should mention that we are recording the session. So what I will do is put it up on my website. So if any of you do want to just go back and re-listen to some of the comments, which have been really, really rich and valuable, then it will be available. Okay, so sorry to be the time dragon. Marty, could we hand over to you?
Sure. Thank you, Andrea. Yeah, so I sent a preface of a book to Bosisiwe. It's a very long book. It's the title of it is 21 Voices from Israel and South Africa, Why the Palestinian Struggle Matters. I think it's about 550 pages, I think, when it will be laid out. It's very long. But I hope that it will be interesting reading. In fact, the contribution, part of the contribution, well, let me first say that many people, and we see it now again with the recent war in Gaza, that the deep differences between the narratives of the Palestinians and the Israelis lead most people to conclude that it's just too difficult to know how it all started, why the tension continues unabated, and how it can be resolved. And most people simply give up on the matter because they think it's insurmountable. And of course, there are others who are passionate about either this side or that side. And with this book that is aimed, sorry, at peers, at international scholars, at researchers, at educators, but also at anyone interested in the kind of leadership that does not attempt to find simple fixes to problems, I hope I'm trying to combine conversational language with scientific and moral, an approach that's scientifically and morally sound. So it is a scholarly book with all the notes, all the references. Sorry. I'm sorry.
No problem.
But it reads, hopefully, it's hopefully easy to read. And most of it is actually in spoken language, because it starts with my own recount, my shift from being a passive oppressor, not knowing the dynamics of Israel and Palestine, to being a scholar activist, and why I decided to do this interviews. And then, but the heart of the book consists of 21 interviews that I did with South Africans from various backgrounds and with Jewish Israelis. So there are 21 voices, because 21 people, because one person has dual citizenship. She is both Israeli and South Africa. I planned for 20, but it worked out on 21. And in the last section, then I connect the dots between what they say. But let me just maybe hone in, since this is the question that I ask others. What is the scientific contribution of it? I just want to open my document here. Yeah, it broadly, it offers an interdisciplinary and a contextual lens for contemporary global challenges. So it's not just about a specific geopolitical issue, but it's also about the imperative for moral integrity on personal, national, and international levels. And it really envisions, the voices in this book envisions real alternatives, not only dreamt of alternatives, but real alternatives that are actually already playing out on a very small scale to imperialism and other forms of state violence. One can add racism, colonialism, lots of isms, patriarchism, etc. So, but this book, in both in content and style, I hope represents a new and innovative approach to the field of Palestine-Israel studies. It's double-blind, peer-reviewed, and the issue is firstly, it addresses the international shortage of scientific explanations on why there's nothing available on why non-Palestinians support the Palestinian struggle. There are various studies on people who do it, but not on why they do it. So there's nothing from an ethical perspective on it. It also addresses the lack of information on what motivates the advocacy specific of South Africans. And it also addressed the absence of information on activism of both South Africans and Jewish Israelis in one publication. The other layer of what I hope will be a contribution is the fact that the layered contents of in-depth interviews in spoken language, and therefore also the use of plain language, facilitate experiences of immersion in lived circumstances. You get to see what happens on the ground, what happens in the hearts and minds of people through their lived experience. And this in turn encourage contextual explorations of key concepts. So you build up a vocabulary, you build up knowledge, because you get it from the one person, then you get it in a different way from another person. You get the answers on the similar questions from another person. So the book consists mainly of autobiographical and participatory views on real life events, and as I said, in conversational language. But then in addition to that, I add systematic analysis and theoretical reasoning whereby I engage with the work of other people to encourage critical intellectual reflection. But in the whole, also, I hope that the book will invite moral discernment. And so that's why this audience is not only scholars and researchers and educators, but also the general public, and also activists in other fields. You know, why do they do what they do when there is so many obstacles, and when they go against the mainstream? Why do people do that? So what really interests me, and this is what I've been asking myself for many years, is why people associate with different values, and how can something that one person views as so blatantly wrong be the conscious choice of another? And what makes us reverse or shift positions or remain fixed in a particular point of view? Is it pure choice or free will? Is it destiny or fate? What informs our attitudes and behavior? And I think most of us will agree that we live now in a world, sorry, that seems poised on a knife edge. We certainly live in a country that seems poised on a knife edge. And so I'm hungry. I was hungry and remain hungry to learn from others on what we can do about this. Okay. Did I use up all my 10 minutes? Because I can talk more.
You have actually another 2 if you want them, but we're also happy to. I think maybe just let's ask Busisiwe to comment, and then we can have a little bit more time for discussion. That would be great. Okay, thanks. Yeah, thanks so much. So Busisiwe.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mati, for this presentation. It's really a very interesting contemporary issue, and one can really sense your passion in terms of this topic as well. I think some of the questions that I have, you are outlining now as you are presenting, because from the preface, one was not able, even though one was able to see that this was a lived experience that came out from your lived experience, you know, and it was not quite clear who the book is actually intended for. But I hear that now you are actually saying that it is intended for, you know, the academics, the researchers, you know, across the board. And also, I was also very keen on knowing what the theoretical framework is, you know, that you are basing all your findings on, because the preface is not really saying in terms of what is the academic direction that you are actually taking, you know, from this, you know, in terms of the book itself. But what I'm interested to know is, even in terms of the voices that you have, are there any Jewish voices, for an example, that you were able to hear from, so that you could hear a balanced view in terms of what you are actually giving us? And I'm also interested in terms of, have you had any critical reflections? What type of critical reflections have you come across in terms of this? And have you also considered the historical biblical context that is also theoretical in terms of where the Jewish-Palestinian conflict is actually coming from? Yes, those are just the type of questions that I was interested in.
Thanks, Busisiwe. Mati, do you want to respond to those before we open up?
Yes, please. Yeah, I very much like the questions that Busisiwe raised, because these are the typical questions that the reader would raise. Firstly, on the target audience, I do actually specify the last sentence of the preface reads, "It is offered to peers, international scholars, researchers, educators, and anyone interested in the kind of leadership that does not attempt to find simple fixes to problems in a troubled world, but aims to shape healthy society." So that is actually there. I did not want to use the preface for the research rationale, but there is a whole section in the book, at the back of the book, where I explain the research rationale. So it's clear in the book. I may, now that you asked this, decide to actually shift it more perhaps to the front of the book after the preface. Maybe that will be a good idea because I'm still unsure. So thank you for that question. On whether I have listened to Jewish voices. Well, most of the people whom I interviewed were Jews. The South Africans, there were a number of Jews, the South Africans that I interviewed, and they were Muslims, Christians, Jews, and people from other orientations. And then obviously all the Jewish Israelis are Jewish. So I would say about, I can't remember now the exact number, but far more than half of the people in this book are actually Jews. And I learned a lot about what does it mean to be Jewish, and that it does not mean that you are religious necessarily. Definitely to qualify as a Jew in Israel does not expect you to be, does not specify that you have to be religious. So obviously I unpack all those definitions very clearly in the book. There's a long list of key terms that I explain, extensive notes and so on. And then in the first section where I describe my own journey to becoming involved in this issue, I definitely raised the issue of the historical biblical perceptions out there. And I have a table that shows that Jews from as long as we know until now, so in other words, the Israelis included, have reigned in that or occupied that area for 500 years, while Christian groups have occupied that area for 526 years, and Muslim groups have occupied that that land for 1,500 years. So there's no proof, scientific proof, that on the basis of that you can justify land ownership on biblical grounds, or I unpack that you cannot, because the Pentateuch offers no proof of it doesn't show where the borders of Israel is in the Old Testament, and the Old Testament concept of Israel is not a land but a people, whereas the modern state of Israel is a political entity. It is a state. So I unpack those distinctions. But there's actually an excellent article by Christy van der Westhuizen and Sakkie Spangenberg that's on LitNet. It is written in Afrikaans, but there's a 1,000-word summary in English that you can maybe have a look at. And they did this research to say that there's nothing in the Bible or in any of the holy texts that say that you can justify it according to occupation history or according to what the holy texts say about this. And then just finally, you said, did I engage in critical reflections? Yes. In addition to what these 20 people said, I definitely did. I engage in critical reflection on what they said, but then I also engage with the work with various other scholars, including Jewish scholars. Yeah, extensive references to the work of others. And then I unpack, I have to say this, I unpack the problem, how problematic it is to talk of a balanced approach, because this is exactly the thing that we spoke about earlier today, is how language is appropriated to convey a certain agenda. So to be balanced, to be non-partial, etc. There's a whole set of words in the Zionist language that mislead well-meaning people to not see that Zionism is racism, that it is colonial, that it is imperialist, that it's really bad, and that we are all set up for lies because we believe these things. So yeah, balanced is a key word in the book.
Okay, thank you. That's really important. And I know we're running out of time. Just, I mean, I really do think that that question that you asked about, how is it that something that you or a person considers to be wrong is the conscious choice of another person? That polarization and then the impossibility of balance is something really, really important to consider as maybe a question going forward. So thank you very much for that. It's again another topic I think that we can just speak about for a long time, and I feel very sorry to rush us on like this, but I'm very aware of the fact that we have already taken ourselves quite far over time. But thank you so much for that. Abby, do you want to quickly raise your kind of comment, and then we can move on to you.
Okay, I just said I don't know if you know Heidi Groenboom.
Very well.
Yeah, so no, I just said that she touches on those ideas about appropriation of language with Zionism. She was the first person that I heard present a paper on that, and I thought her ideas are very, very helpful in linking to apartheid and colonialism and how
Exactly.
it feeds manifested in Zionism. But yeah, I'll then start with mine. Let me show my face. So
let's do. Just 2 seconds, Abby. I just want to sit down, sort of change our view a little, and then okay, excellent. All right, thank you.
So I teamed up with Claudia, and I just sent her the sort of article for a paper that I'm presenting. So I'm adapting the article into a paper presentation now. That was sort of what I asked Claudia just to help me with, was how to kind of raise the main points from the article for the paper presentation. And I am going to be presenting a paper at the Technology and Sexuality Conference that Andrea is co-hosting. And the title for my paper is Techne, Sexuality and Shame, Performing the Language of the Body and the Shamed Sexualized Other in Tupang, the Third Testament. The abstract to the title is, the aim of this paper is to discuss what the techne of performance aesthetics in Tupang, the Third Testament, can offer us when thinking about shame and sexuality. The paper looks at the word techne firstly from the etymological root as the art of, and secondly in how certain bodies are mediated through cultural modes of technological production, such as newspaper articles. This consideration of the terms techne, shame, and sexuality is specific to the events surrounding the rape of a 9-month-old baby in 2001 in Louisville, South Africa in the Northern Cape, and discusses how the event was represented in the media and in the play. The paper explores how a more embodied, affective aesthetic might perform against the culturally constructed body of the sexually shamed other, hence offering witnesses a reconsideration of the sexually shamed body. The discussion also provides the listener with a challenging invitation to explore the performativity of their own gaze in the construction of certain shamed bodies, touching on notions of power, abjection, othering, affective attachments, and sympathy. So I think some of you might not be familiar with the play text Tapang. Tapang was written in 2004, and it was actually a master's output by a famous South African director called Lara Foote. So she did quite extensive research into the community. She worked with her cast, very much grassroots collective research that she did. And from that, she compiled a play. And what I'm trying to do in this paper is I'm trying to inquire and open up an inquiry around different forms of techne, specifically in regards to what the media's representation of this event was and what the play Tapang is doing. And my area of interest is specifically affective aesthetics. How do specific aesthetic choices in performance communicate and create affective experiences in the audiences that participate and engage with that? And what was quite interesting was when I looked at newspaper reports on how this was framed. Again, I think one of the key sort of things that's come through in the symposium today is about language. And the articles from the newspapers, it's interesting in the language choices that they use. So some of the examples as one from the Cape Argus that read, "In Louisville, the line between humans and the animal kingdom became blurred." In a similar tone, the Sowetan stated, "Men of South Africa, why do we allow lust and greed to turn us into beasts without emotions?" And the Sunday Independent stated, "We have grappled as a nation to understand this barbarism." National and international media attention on the rape of baby Tapang radicalized a language of a state of emergency. Other newspaper reports read, "Baby Tapang, town still confronts devils. This is a place known to the civilized world only for the infamous rape. Even animals don't do to their young what we would do to baby Tapang. How do we punish rape monsters?" And what was interesting in the articles and in sort of the collective memory, I think most of us will be familiar with the event that happened in 2001 when this 9-month-old baby was raped. And the other thing that sort of pushes Lara Foote, the playwright and director of Tapang, to write it was that at the time there was a recording of 20,000 baby rapes. So it wasn't just this one incident, there was this massive peak, and there was a kind of a collective consciousness that was happening around baby rapes. And then there was again the kind of myth that was being purported that raping a virgin or having sex with a virgin rather would cure HIV/AIDS. And that also sort of linked to this discourse around the rape of the 9-month-old baby and baby rapes. But what I sort of pose in my discussion about performance and specifically Tapang, which was most recently staged, I think the last staging of it was 2018 or 2019. So it was first performed in 2004 and it's still being staged in 2018, is that we need to discuss what aesthetics of performance offer that the media might not, and that the media is unable to sustain a protracted public engagement with an event. Whereas Tapang, however, through the ritual of performance, keeps this shameful memory alive and in relation with other bodies. The media use shame as a form of moral reproach, whereas Tapang tries to goad people into action through meaningful connection and engagement. So again, the media presents it very monochromatically, whereas performance is engaging the audiences in very traumatic, discomforting, hard to resolve rationally experiences in a very different way. And I kind of suggest and argue from my own experiences with the play and reading the text that Foote does something quite unusual in maintaining, sustaining engagement with audiences around the idea, so that it doesn't create a disconnected and disengaged audience member or public, but rather connects us. And some of the ideas that are really central to the play from an aesthetic framing is that Foot uses multi-purpose objects. She also has a very small cast. There's 2 performers who perform in the play. Ruth and Simon are the 2 characters, but Simon is more like a griot. He is the narrator, and he also performs other characters, whereas Ruth is she's a constant character in the play. She doesn't change, and she also doesn't speak. So the performance itself uses a very embodied aesthetic and objects. And the one object that's used quite craftfully and carefully is a broomstick. And Lara Foot links different experiences of collective memories and narratives that she collects during her research to sort of interlink into this this broomstick that Simon uses at different stages. And at one point, the perpetrator for the rape, his name is Alfred in the play, which is fictitious. But his body is represented by the broom. But at the same time, there's a story and a reflection about a young girl, Sarah, who's also the witness to the rape, who was used that also kind of gave sexual favors to young pubescent boys in the community. And the broomstick was then again used as a visual cue during the moment of ejaculation, where the boys would then ejaculate into a loaf of bread. And that same broomstick is then used when there's a reflection about Alfred and how his father had a hofro, which is a cultural term used in the community. And she actually ends up beating Alfred so badly because he wet his pants that his body is broken up into pieces of the broomstick that Simon then uses to visualize Alfred also physically breaks up in the play, in the performance, because he physically actually breaks the broom. But these intersections and these crossovers that are aesthetically performed in the stage production of Tapan definitely created a reconsideration for myself around these narratives of the monster rapist, of the shamed community. And in return, that gaze that is often placed on the community, specifically through media, the gaze is returned on me as the audience member. And I become the apathetic bystander who doesn't do anything. And the engagement with this very discomforting event that happened in 2001 is still something that persists in my psyche today. And I think that that's a very powerful set of things to think with. So yeah, these are just ideas that I'm sort of opening up to you. It's quite a detailed article, but I'm trying to sort of shrink it down into a paper presentation for people who aren't familiar with the play or with specific performance aesthetics, and how to sort of hone into key points of consideration to reflect in the paper presentation.
Sorry, let's unmute myself. Abigail, thank you. Difficult topic. Difficult topic to kind of get your mind around. Perhaps, yeah, let's just move over to Claudia. And
Okay.
yeah, thanks, Claudia.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Abby. I really enjoyed reading your article. I did diverge from the mandate slightly in terms of how to break it down into a conference paper, mainly because I felt that it was something that needs to happen quite close to the text. So what I'll do is send you the track changes that I've actually made on the text itself. But I feel that what you have presented here today is a really, really good start to breaking the article down, because I think the entire thing was about 21, 22 pages, and you condensed it very well now in the presentation. So yeah, that is just a starting point. So I've just given a slight summary of it. So I particularly appreciated the varying facets of shame that you talk about that are portrayed in the work, and the attentions to modes of humanity that the audience is confronted with for the different characters. Also, the attention to confronting the audience with their own complicities is interesting, and the important discursive point from a post-apartheid reception and performativity in this particular field. With all of these merits in mind, and just also to return back to the idea of how to condense it into a conference paper, I think that there can be a clearer distinction made between what you were talking about, between the language used by the media and the language between used in terms of the performative aesthetics of the play itself. I think that can be made clearer in the paper. There were times when I wasn't sure which one was actually being discussed. It might be my ineptitude as a reader at times, but for me that is something that could have been made clearer at times. But with all of these, with the considerable merits of the play in mind, there are a few other minor points that I would just like to get to. Firstly, we're told that the perpetrator, as you mentioned in your talk, is beaten terribly by his mother as a child, and we are made to be aware of his own hardships. And as you discuss, we think about his own humanness as well. But we don't really ever gain insight to why he raped the little girl, or is this left a mystery in the work? Following from this, we are told that at his sentencing, he doesn't wince, he doesn't show any emotion. Supposedly, he is indifferent to the suffering and the turn his life is about to take. But does he feel shame? To me, it seems like a worthwhile question to ponder, and the paper doesn't really offer much insight into this point. There's a considerable body of literature, and you did allude to this, albeit controversial, on the rape epidemic in post-apartheid South Africa, and speculation as to how it may be connected to South Africa's past and socioeconomic conditions. Of course, we are dealing with a sexual act, but we have the inherent power relationships, dominance and violence inextricably linked to rape as a sexual act. And it could, in my view, be noted more prominently in the discussion. Not to mention that rape, in the instance that it is discussed here, links to the rampant statistics of child abuse that are reported and grossly unreported in South Africa. My point here is simply that shame discussed, the shame discussed emanates from sexuality, but violence and anti-socialism and complicity are also aspects that are at play here. It seems to me, and again, you do allude to this, but not in any great detail, that we are dealing with different types of shame. I wonder if there would be some merit in granting a little more emphasis on these. For example, the individual shame that we see with Ruth, the shame that we hear from Simon, who is narrating, the shame that Sarah exhibits, and the communal shame of the community, and the national shame that we see that is reflected by the news and the media. These are just a few ideas that may or may not be useful. But once again, I found it to be a worthwhile and invigorating piece of work. Thank you, Abby.
Claudia.
Fabulous. Sorry, thanks so much, Claudia. That's very insightful response. Abby, do you want to respond to that first before we open up?
No, I just think thank you very much, all very helpful. And I think those last concluding points that you made about the different types of shame, I hadn't necessarily thought of that in relation to the different characters that are discussed in the play. And I think that's also why the play becomes such an engaging play, is because there are these different aspects of shame that we are experiencing, and that it's not just communal, it's also national, it's also individual. And the individual shames that each of those different characters also carry. And I think that's what's so interesting about shame, is that it is a very subjective and nuanced experience, and it is, yeah, it's difficult to also.
So difficult to talk about. And I think especially, I was thinking a lot about Ruth, for example, and how she doesn't speak a word, or only speaks a word right at the end, I think you said, and how it's this a very tonalized form of shame, but it's still very poignant in the play, from what you said in your article.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to move us on. Unless there are sort of burning questions or comments, this difficult topic to talk about. I mean, I'm very interested in the idea of the kind of the national and collective shame on part of the audience, the people who hear about this. I mean, even now, hearing your presentation makes me feel a deep sense of shame. So there's something interesting there in the art of shaming and the art of, or you know, connecting to the kind of the idea of the technology conference or techne. There's an art of shaming which is very different from the play compared with from the newspaper articles that kind of insist on this moral shame and kind of there's something very interesting in that dynamic between the two different ways of affecting you know, an audience. Okay, I think Claudia, would you like to kind of take over and maybe move us on to a slightly less difficult topic, although it's a brave one?
Yeah, sure. This is a paper that is still in its very early stages, that I am co-authoring with somebody else. I'll get to all of that in a moment. So the working title at this stage is Ushaka Kazenza Kana. I apologize for my Zulu. Ownership, authorship, and the 1978 Copyright Act. For my presentation today, I've decided to focus on an article that I plan to co-author with Dr. Mark Runch, who's a postgrad at CANRAD at Nelson Mandela University. The piece seeks to investigate aspects of ownership, authorship, and copyright in the African ethic, Ushaka, by composer Khumalo, which was partly orchestrated by Christopher Langford James, 1952 to 2008. James, despite his significant involvement with the project, which I'll discuss shortly, has received little recognition for his efforts. Antoni Shonken has written an extensive and convincing analysis on James's musical contribution to the work, and concludes that 57.88% of the fundamental musical material in Ushaka can be attributed to James. James's contribution to Ushaka is therefore already assumed, and the paper in turn does not seek to establish whether James's work deserves acknowledgement in the final version of Ushaka. Rather, the work is used as a case study to demonstrate the manner in which the current copyright legislation does not adequately address the aspects of musical authorship and ownership under our current copyright law. So by means of a little disclaimer, the article is still in its very early stages. We intend to submit it to Music and Letters, which is a musicology journal, which has a strong focus on life writing and archival research. Nevertheless, I hope that I'll get some good feedback out of all of this today. As most of you will know, my postdoctoral research considers the relationship between copyright legislation in South Africa from a musicological and social sciences perspective. From 2014 to 2017, Dr. Mark Rinch and I shared an office in the music department at Stellenbosch University while we were reading for our doctoral degrees under the same supervisor. Mark wrote a thesis on Christopher James, who would live out his years in Pretoria. He was initially born in what was then Rhodesia. Through the very nature of co-supporting one another through the PhD process, I then became well acquainted with Christopher James, the man and the music and the composer, although I've never met him. So a little information on the methodology that we plan to follow for this paper. There is a Christopher James archive collection, or the CJC archive, which is held at the Documentation Center for Music at Stellenbosch University. Relevant documents for the archive still need to be examined, although Mark has already examined the archive in quite considerable length for his PhD. So we have a good idea of what is contained in the archive, and the archive is already catalogued. The archival documents that we will need to have a look at include contracts pertaining to Shaka, and it contains, the archive in general contains personal documents such as letters, photographs, program notes, newspaper clippings, scores, and contracts, as I've already mentioned. So a little bit of background on Ushaka. Between the years 1988 and 1993, James was commissioned to become involved with the orchestration of the Zulu epic, and which was composed by Mzilikazi Khumalo, which premiered on 25 November 1994 at Johannesburg City Hall under the baton of Robert Maxim. The libretto of the work was based on the poet by Themba Simang, I apologize, and a lengthy set of circumstances took place during the time that James was involved in the project that exceed the scope of my presentation today. But it is important to note that in 1994, after the premiere of the work, Maxim expressed his dissatisfaction with James's orchestration of Ushaka. Maxim was in turn asked to make revisions of the score. Initially, this was done with James's cooperation, but James then opted out, both due to time and work commitments, as well as his disagreement with Max's approach to the orchestration of the work, which he found to be overly westernized. James's own aesthetic ascribed to a far more, he wanted the work to retain its, quote unquote, African elements. To date, the James estate does not receive royalties for its involvement in the Ushaka project. By the time James relinquished himself from his involvement in the project in 1994, he was mentally exhausted, and his long-term mental health battles with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, the exact diagnosis is not entirely clear, had relapsed. He was, according to letters and interviews, bitter about the events that had taken place until his death from leukemia in 2008. A close friend of James, Christopher Ballantyne, put it as follows, quote, "He talked a lot about that. That was just a major blow in his life, and we talked about it from a number of points of view. He was bitter about the way his own involvement of it got completely cut off, excised, how the piece had been taken over by Robert Maxim and Hollywoodized in the process," unquote. So how is Ushaka related to copyright? James's involvement in the Ushaka Eke can be related to a number of debates on copyright legislation in South Africa. Firstly, with Shonkin's observation that James's role in the orchestration of Ushaka went far beyond that of an orchestrator in mind, the lack of distinction that may. Sorry, that was a bad sentence. The lack of distinction that is made in legal terms between arrangement, orchestration, rearrangement, and composition is lacking. It would be incredulous to suggest that law should stipulate the exact technical and artistic peripheries of a new work, but it is worth noting that SAMRO, the South African Music Rights Organization, has tiered a scale of royalties for these different roles in musical works. Surely then, legislation like the Copyright Act of 1978 and the Performance Protection Act should at the very least stipulate what they are. As for the specifics of the contracts and agreements to which James may have signed, this is something we hope the archive will be able to advance our understanding of. But it seems possible at this point that James, like many other creators, was likely not educated on what his rights on copyright were or may have been. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, I'm muted again. And thanks, Claudia. It's a kind of real contentious issue, especially with decolonization and all of that. So, Abby, would you like to comment on it, and then we'll open it up a bit?
I just had a few comments to Claudia, just to say, first of all, that I think it's a really good example of the copyright law discrepancies and the point that you're trying to argue. I mean, it's something that I wasn't familiar with at all. And now when I think about the lack of distinction between arrangement, orchestration, rearrangement, because you also mentioned that I think Maximum, who's the conductor, once doing it himself, he has problems with it. And then there's a dispute between him and James around it, because as the conductor himself, he doesn't like how certain pieces have been orchestrated from the composition. And I think that that's just a really helpful and strong point to sort of preface the paper with, even about the education about copyright laws, and how many people are actually having access to this, and that James is not just a lightweight, he has a whole archive. And he himself is not astute with what the copyright laws are and these different discrepancies. And also the point that you make about the discrepancies in royalty distribution between those tierings. And what does that speak? Again, about reinforced colonial thinking, about what is the difference between the composer and ownership and authorship. What are the differences between those two, from the composer to the writer? I mean, even the poem itself, the lyrics to the song come from Themba Nsimang, and particularly the Copyright Act seems to be needing to refigure how they think about these things, because they're not, these are not songs that are made in individual tasks. They're very collective. And the other point that I just said was, I think you said to yourself that you hadn't actually gotten into the archive, but for me it would be very interesting to know what his contract actually said, because James did sign a contract for the song. And again, what do contracts actually look like in these situations where there's so many people involved in pulling this piece together? And perhaps also just to, I think, I'm sure between you and Mark, there will be some sort of conclusion just as why there was so little recognition. Was it because there was a dispute between the group that was working together that James seemed to have issues with how the final sort of arrangement for the piece ended up going live? But yeah, I think for you specifically with the work that you've done with the Copyright Act of 1978 and the current pressing changes that are happening to that, this really goes as another great example in education about the discrepancies and the problems that this act actually has. And again, I think, yeah, really, really interesting. And I enjoyed reading about your research.
Thank you, Abby. Can I quickly respond, Andrea?
Yes, yes, do. Yeah, then we'll go to Janet after that.
Yeah, so thanks, Abby. Yeah, so there are a few things. So firstly, yeah, you're right. We need to get into the archive. What we do know so far is that he was initially paid for the initial orchestration. He was paid, I think it was 5,800 Rand for the initial orchestration, which is not really that much. And then later on, I think it was another 1,200 Rand or something like that. And then this thing with Maxim came along. So we would have to see what the letters and correspondence also look like in terms of what they agreed to. The other difficult thing that we have to navigate is that Christopher James had a very long-standing history of schizophrenia. So we're not sure if perhaps him opting out of the project was related to his mental health concerns. So that's also something that we have to try and navigate quite sensitively, and see where that leads us as well. But certainly he should have been acknowledged, and the Shonken thesis is very interesting because it actually does in a very laborious kind of way literally count notes. And it's very clear that James contributed quite a lot of the musical material to that. So he should have been acknowledged in the final score. So whether he opted out for whatever reason, he should be receiving royalties for it. Yeah.
Thanks, Claudia.
Sure.
Janet, would you like to chat about what you raised on the chat?
Hi. Yeah, sorry, I just asked if you know about the Sodom and Linda copyright battle.
Oh, yes, I do.
Sure.
Yeah, that's a very interesting topic as well, because of course it relates to the whole debate on copyright and traditional knowledge, which is another debate all on its own.
Could you give us, for us who don't know, a little more?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just aware of time, so I didn't want to go into that. But
right.
So at this stage, traditional knowledge is considered part of the public domain. So there've been a number of court cases in which there have been traditional songs used. And the argument has been because it forms part of the public domain, it's okay. And the current copyright law says that if something exists in material form, either in the form of a score or a recording, that the person who owns that material version can copyright it. So in the case of traditional works, if I, for example, make a recording of a traditional work that is, so to speak, part of the public domain, that song then belongs to me, even though it is actually composed by a community that created it many, many years ago. So it becomes a very, very difficult and contentious. It's huge in pharmaceutical, in the pharmaceutical industry, because of all the herbs and sort of supplements that are being used, that are supposedly, there was the Hoodier example that the San presumably used for, you know, when they were on hunting, and there was that whole debate about that. So it's big bucks in pharmaceuticals, but in music it's also become quite a contentious issue. And they have recently passed legislation on it. It's just unfortunately very, very badly drafted legislation. So it still remains quite a contentious issue.
Yeah, so you just, for other people who don't know, Solomon Linder claimed that he was the author of the melody of Wemowe, which is recorded as The Lion Sleeps Tonight, and that huge Hollywood cartoon movie, whatever, The Lion
King.
Made huge amounts of money.
Solomon Linder had been dead for 50 years already when that happened. But his family was eventually able to get royalties from it. It was initially Wemowe, and then Disney took it and made it into The Lion Sleeps Tonight. And then his family, then Rian Malan actually wrote an article on it and brought it to the public's attention. And then it was taken up by Spoor and Fisher, who are a big IP firm in South Africa. And they took it up with Disney in South Africa. And eventually, after a long contorted story, were able to get Disney to pay royalties to the family. So it was really Rian Malan that brought it to the public's attention. Yeah.
But it doesn't seem to me that was a traditional song. I mean, Solomon Linder claimed authorship of it, if I understand.
No, it was Ikasamia.
Was it?
It was a mining song, yeah.
Sure, it's very interesting.
Yeah, you can watch it on YouTube. It's there.
So it's a very contentious. Do you, with traditional music, do you then try to formalize it into an era in which copyright is the discourse, the mode of being, or do you change copyright to kind of accommodate a collective way of producing music?
I mean, that's the big question, because I mean, you're then forcing traditional music into a space that it is not really meant to exist in, so that it can make money. And then who do you pay the royalties to? I mean, a lot of these things we don't even know who the composers of the songs were. So how do we know who to pay the royalties to? Or who to pay even which families or which communities, we don't know. So it's a very, very difficult task.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or whether there should be a royalty system at all. But anyway.
Yeah. So we can go on for a long time on that one. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So I think on that note, I see that quite a few people have had to actually already leave us. I know that we're pretty well on time. I'm quite impressed with us. So thank you all for being willing to submit to my what shall we call it, my time dragonness. And Thank you all for incredibly interesting presentations and for the participation of hosts and I'd say our audience, the kind of questions that have arisen both in voice and in chat. It's been really very interesting and wonderful session. I'm very excited about all of your projects. It looks like there's a lot going on, and I'm very happy to hear you're all working quite solidly on articles and book chapters, and I think that the NIHSS is going to be very proud of us and impressed with us. So keep on with that, keep going, and please do keep connection with one another. I think that that's actually really important and really exciting. And last thing, if you have the desire to do a kind of a presentation on your topic, you know, just a single, like a guest lecture or public lecture even, or some kind of online presentation, let's get engaged with that and let's start talking about that. You can, just give me an email and we can maybe set up some kind of series where we do that amongst postdocs. Okay, so thank you all very, very much for participating. And yes, we will hopefully see you all together soon. And keep contact. I really dislike the process of actually saying goodbye, so maybe just turn on your videos and give us a wave goodbye. Yes, and I'm hoping that we will all catch up soon. Okay,
Thanks everybody.
Right. Okay, thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.